Good morning. This is Wakiya Nape, or Thunderhands in English, with the channel The Red Road. Today I'm going to do a video on the Apache Kid, one of my favorites. And I will get into that later as to why he is one of my favorites, but this is a unique story of the Old West and the indigenous people in general. Incidentally, this channel is geared that way towards the indigenous people of this land, North America, and the stories surrounding them. But I also do other videos as well, if you look in the archives. But this is the main thrust that I want to stay on at this particular point in the history of this channel, which has been around for 10 years. Anyway, I would like to tell you a story today. Your friendly wisdom keeper and storyteller would like to tell you a story about the Apache Kid. And I will do that with words and pictures. So here's a picture of the Apache Kid that I took from an old black and white historic photo. I will show you that photo later on, or perhaps I will show it to you next. But this is the Apache Kid, and the Apache Kid was born in Arizona around the year 1860. And he was born in a place called the Arapache Canyon, which is a beautiful area in Arizona. And as a kid, he grew up in that area, and he was surrounded by all kinds of goings on. Basically, the Apache Wars were in full swing. And he was attracted to the idea of being a scout or working for the Bluecoats, but he was full-blood Apache, and he did have strong connections with the Apache community. This guy was a supreme tracker of all times and was influenced and hung out with other mentors like Al Sieber, which I will get to in a minute, and Buford and people like that. He kind of rubbed shoulders as a kid. He was kind of just very interested in the whole war thing, the whole scouting thing, what was going on at that time. He was strongly attracted to it. And so this person was quite a character in history. Basically, I first found out about him when I was researching the Old West and came across another photo, which I will show you later, of him. And it said, outlaw, the outlaw. Well, he was considered an outlaw. But before that time, and really he wasn't an outlaw, but before that time, he was a scout, supreme warrior, supreme tracker. That's the main thing here. A supreme tracker. Super into tracking, because I did a lot of that as a kid in Arizona. So yes, this is the Apache Kid. This is a colorized photo. He's holding what looks like a breech loader, or it could even be a flintlock. It looks that old, rifle. And I put a different background behind him, as you will see soon. This is an actual black and white photo that I took the colorized photo from, that I did, as you can see here. And this was taken somewhere in Arizona, probably around the San Carlos Reservation. The San Carlos Reservation is where all the Apaches were, and where all the scouts and where the head of scouts were, like Al Sieber and his cohorts. And of course, you had the generals that were in charge of the area. So this was probably taken around that time period, probably he started tracking when he was 19 years old. 19 years old. He rubbed shoulders with the crew and worked his way in to the situation. Yeah, so this is kind of a nice color photo of the Arapapi Canyon area in Arizona where the Apache Kid was born. There were a lot of bands of Apaches mixed throughout this whole area of, let's say, southeast and southern Arizona and parts of New Mexico and even parts of Mexico. Beautiful area. You could see the saguaro cactus here, which I mentioned in my previous video, that only grow in the area of Arizona. So this is where he was born. This is one of the first characters that the Apache Kid came in contact with. This man was the world-renowned Al Sieber. And Al Sieber was from Europe. I believe he was from Germany or somewhere around there. That was his roots. Let me say right now, I forgot to mention that the Apache Kid's name is, oh man, this is so hard to say in English. I mean, just pronunciation, I should say, in Apache. Haskebe ne natal is the pronunciation, or ntal. It probably had some kind of guttural or nasal thing with it, but that was his name. Haskebe ne natal. You could see why Al Sieber in the crew didn't like using that name. In fact, they got to the point where they just said, look, that name is too hard to pronounce, forget it. We're going to just call you the Kid, because he just was kind of a kid. And he was the Apache Kid. And so in a broader context, yes, he was the Apache Kid. And his wife's name, Apache Kid's wife's name, was even harder to pronounce. And they just called her Beauty, all right, because she was a beautiful woman. But this is Al Sieber. He was, if you ever saw the movie Geronimo, Robert Duvall played the part of Al Sieber in that. Kind of true to history, not exactly. But it did lend a flavor that was actually pretty good. About 90% of that movie was accurate. So if you want to see a movie about Apaches, and that would be the good place to go. I think Geronimo was played by Wes Studi, and then you had Gene Hackman as Nantan Lupon, which was the name for Crook, General George Crook in Apache. Meant silver fox or silver wolf or something like that. But anyway, this was the first guy that the Apache Kid came into contact with. Why? Because he wanted to be a scout. They didn't take him in right away. He just kind of hung around, and he met some other people like the chief of police for the Indian San Carlos Reservation. Just kind of worked his way in, and but when they found out how good a tracker he was, see, that's the deal. They needed Apache trackers to attract. That was the only way to track an Apache, because they were so excellent at tracking that and hiding and stealth and guerrilla fighting and all that stuff. The only way you could find them was to get another Apache to track them. So basically that was the story. Here's another guy that the Apache kid rubbed shoulders with. And again, this was the Clay Buford, Captain Clay Buford, quite a historical, colorful character in his own right. A lot of these guys came out of the Civil War, both Al Sieber and this guy, Buford, came out of the Civil War and were veterans, hardcore fighting men, veterans of the Civil War. Matter of fact, Al Sieber got his leg injured or wounded pretty bad in the Civil War and recovered from that completely. However, you will see in this story that misfortune was to befall him again with his other leg or his other foot. So this is Buford, and he was quite a character. Not only was he in the Civil War, but he also had a background just as a cowboy. And so how he became captain of the police force on San Carlos evades me at the moment, but that's a whole nother story. This supposedly is a picture of the Apache kid when he was younger with some other scouts or other warriors. This is a very good photo of him, a very rare photo. All my photos are archival photos. You can find some on the internet, but there's a lot that you can't find. I have to take out of books that I have, take pictures of the pictures in the books, just so I can show them to you. But I've been doing this for years, and I have thousands of photos, and I'll be wanting to look for some particular guy, and man, I'll have to go through all kinds of photos just to find what I'm looking for. But yeah, this is a picture of him when he was very, very young. And he was trained, might want to mention this right now, he was trained as a supreme warrior and tracker along with a lot of other kids being raised as an Apache. Just because he went out as a scout later on for the Bluecoats doesn't mean he wasn't a hardcore trained Apache. And he was trained with other kids, and one of the training things they had to do was run to the top of a distant mountain in the hot sun and back again with just one mouthful of water and not swallowing the water. That was one of the rigorous training that they had to go through. And he went through training with other future scouts, like one of the most famous would be a guy named Mickey Free, who, you know, I could tell a story about him, and I probably will in a future video, all by himself, just Mickey Free. He started everything. He started the whole wars between the Bluecoats and the Apaches. Basically, they all kicked off with an incident surrounding him, and I'll explain that in a minute. Now, this is one of the other scouts, Mickey Free, who became notorious or very well known later on, but his story is very unique, and I'm only going to give you a few words about that because I probably want to go into this in depth in a future video. But he was not an Apache. He was trained as a boy. He was captured by an Apache, and the way it happened was this kid was on a ranch that his father owned, and his father was away, and it was a very well-known ranch right on the border of, I think the guy's name was Ward. I think it's Felix Ward was his father's name. It was right on the border of New Mexico and Arizona, kind of in a no man's land. He was out there as a kid in a peach orchard. His mother and father away. The Indians, the Apaches, swooped in because they did this quite often on Mexicans especially. They didn't have a real good relationship with Mexicans. In fact, they hated them. And the Mexicans hated the Apaches as well. But this kid was out on the farm one day, or out in the orchard, and he saw the Apaches coming. He didn't know what to do, so he climbed up and hid in a peach tree. And one of the chiefs came up. I can't remember who it was at this particular time, but he came up, saw the kid in the peach tree. They just slaughtered everybody normally when they came into a raid like that. They just took everybody out. But they saw this kid. He saw this kid up at the peach tree, and he took a liking to him, I think because Mickey had a problem with one of his eyes. Maybe blind in one eye, and the chief that saw him also had a problem with his eye. And so he just took an instant liking to this kid. I think he must have been like maybe 10 years old, maybe even younger. They took him out to the res, and he just basically became an Apache after that, and lived with them and trained with them. And so he was one of the friends of the Apache kid. They trained together, and this would come out later. This will come out later in the story that I'm telling you. As Kebe ne Nato, I'll get it. Got to just keep practicing it. As Kebe ne Nato, the Apache kid. Another picture of him, short hair. You'll see other pictures of him and you have already, with longer hair. This guy was what I would term a chameleon or a super shapeshifter. He was a very spiritual person. And he took on the guise of anybody he wanted to. If he wanted to look and rub shoulders and get in with the white man, he would dress just like this, pretty dapper, pretty sharp, short hair. Also, he wore hats. He wore like a black sombrero at times. Other times he looked disheveled and you wouldn't even recognize him. He was a super chameleon. He blended in everywhere. He could go right up to people and talk to them, and they wouldn't even know it was the notorious Apache kid who was being searched for and had a $5,000 reward on his head. Of course, this was later on. See, this was later on, and I'll get to that in a minute, about how he managed to get himself in trouble, or how they managed to get him in trouble, I should say, for no reason at all, basically, as far as the law goes. But anyway, I'll get to that in a minute. Here's a picture of the San Carlos Reservation, where all these people hung out. Pretty bleak area in Arizona. Having lived there as a kid and tracked the whole area, this is near the Apache Trail, and out towards Globe and Miami and Tucson area. Out there where where the buses don't run. I mean, literally, it was pretty desolate. And if you got sent to this reservation, it was bad news, because it was just a stink hole. I mean, it was lots of scorpions and spiders and snakes, and the heat was like, mostly 110 degrees most of the time, and just a brutal, brutal place to live, because you see, these people lived like you saw in the previous video. They lived in places like the Arapapi Canyon, and the White Mountain Apaches had their pristine area as well, White Mountain Apaches. And so, they took them out of their habitat that they were raised in and took them to another locale that they hated, basically. But this is where all these goings-on took place with Geronimo and the Apache Kid and Al Sieber and the Scouts and the whole ball of wax was around this area in Globe and Tucson and that whole area around there. Not the best place in Arizona, actually. I prefer northern Arizona myself. Here's another picture of the kid. As you can see, he's in the middle here. As you could see, he had a completely different look than the other photos I showed you. This is what I mean when I say he was a chameleon. He still liked to wear some of the white man's clothes sometimes, but he looked completely different. Armed, of course, this is more traditional Apache as far as the headgear and everything. But completely different look. And that's what made him so elusive later on when they were searching for him, because they never really knew what he looked like at that particular time. Here's another picture of the scouts, and this is a rare photo. This is Mickey Free down here. This is the kid that was trained as an Apache. Man, wouldn't that make a story? Wouldn't that make a movie? As well as the Apache kid, just this whole thing. I am writing a book about the Apache kid. I got about a third of it finished, so maybe someday I'll get that out. I have 4 books out already, so just add another one. Here is the Apache kid, pretty much, I'm pretty sure, based on that last photo. I think this is him right here. And then you got other famous scouts in there like Chato and other people that were very well known as scouts. But see, these two had a relationship. The Apache kid and Mickey Free knew each other very well. I just thought I'd mention at this point, a lot of these photographs that you're seeing, most of them, as a matter of fact, around that area was shot by a guy named C.S. Fly in Tombstone. Fly's photography gallery, and this is an actual picture, probably fixed up from the earlier days, probably restored, kept in shape. I'm thinking this is probably a more recent picture in the probably the old part of Tombstone. A lot of people go there, but as far as these just awesome photographs, this guy played a big part in that. And I don't know if he had a place out back that was a wall with cactus around it and stuff, which you see in a lot of these pictures. Or if he had a mission, but he basically took a lot of pictures at this same place. So just thought I would mention that you should give your regards to Mr. Fly for being able to look at history in this manner. And also, another photographer at that time was a guy named, Edward Curtis. Edward Curtis, and he has some magnificent, historical, beautiful photographs. But this was the other guy in the Southwest that did the same thing. I thought I would throw this photo into the mix. This is Crook, Nantan Lupon, and he was pretty well liked, actually, by the Apache people, the warriors and so forth. Why? Because he wasn't as, let's say, strict or as mean or as non-caring as, say, other generals like General Miles. Both of these guys, this guy Crook, was involved in the earlier wars with the Lakota people and Crazy Horse, and so he knew his stuff. Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, he was there around there at that whole time. Right before that time, got into skirmishes with Crazy Horse and so forth. But later on showed up in Arizona with the Apache wars and the reservations and overseeing the reservations and that type of thing. Yeah, so this is General George Crook. This is General Miles. who has a sterner look for sure, and you could tell he's more a by-the-book man. Yeah. He came later and was the guy that was assigned to hunting down Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse after the Battle of Little Bighorn. But he served his time. He came in and actually replaced Crook at a later time and was more hardcore and wanted to knuckle down more and find renegades like Geronimo and Cochise, people like that were, Mangus. He was after all of them. And so, yeah, he wasn't as nice as General Crook. Okay, so now, that's like a little bit of a intro to the whole thing. And now I'm going to get into the part where the Apache kid became notorious and more like an outlaw and that type thing. And I'm going to have to tell you a little story here. And I will get back to the photos in a minute to supplement the story, but let me just tell you a little bit about the story first. So at some point, the Apache kid got to be raised to elevated status to like the head of the scouts under Al Sieber, of course. He was kind of Al Sieber's pet. The two got along fairly well. Al Sieber was not really a nice guy. He had executed Apaches at point blank range in the past. Didn't really give a hoot about it too much, and he had kind of a love-hate relationship with the Apaches. And the reason that he had this love-hate is because he was a supreme tracker. He's probably the best tracker on Earth, one of them at that time. And but there was a little bit of a rivalry between, well, am I a better tracker than you, or that type thing. And but he also highly respected the tracking ability of the Apache. That's why he recruited them, because he knew they were the only ones that could do the job. And so there was kind of a mixed love-hate type relationship period there. And so, but he did hit it off pretty good with the kid. Now, the thing that got the kid in trouble was one time Al Sieber took off, had to go on a trip, and he left the kid in charge, of course, of the Apache scouts, and basically the whole compound there, the guardhouse or whatever, left him in charge of that. So that when he left, the kid had it in his mind way before Al Sieber even left on his vacation or his trip or whatever, that he wanted to go find out about a situation that existed concerning his father, Toga de Chus. Toga de Chus was the name of his father. And there was some kind of rivalry going on between Toga de Chus and this guy named Rip. Both of them were Apaches, and it had to do with, evidently earlier on in their lives, Toga de Chus had ended up with this squaw that was loved by Rip. And she was a real looker, I guess. And they just never settled the issue, okay? And so what happened was, at some point, a guy named, I can't remember his name right offhand, something Jinzi or something, I can't remember, it'll come to me. But he killed Toga de Chus, which is the kid's father, all right? He killed him in this, and it was said that he was put up to it by Rip, the guy that really wanted to have this in for Toga de Chus. And so, yeah, he ended up getting killed, murdered. And so, but this happened a while before this incident I'm telling you about now, where the kid heard of a situation where he could find this Rip character, or he had a chance to go after Rip. And back then it was, you were obliged, if you were an Apache and you had anybody that was murdered or treated wrong or whatever, you had a duty according to Apache code to do a vengeance thing, a revenge thing, settle it once and for all, that type thing. So the kid went out to this party. I guess they were having a little gathering or something, and that's what it was. And they were drinking Tiswin. And Tiswin was the beverage of choice, alcoholic beverage of choice for Apaches. And it was made out of all kinds of good stuff, like fermented fruits and raisins and just a whole bunch of stuff. It was almost like a beer, right, or a wine. But they loved that drink, and they were out there drinking it one day, and in this party. But when kid got wind of it, he wanted to go to this party, so he took some guys with him, left the compound, whatever, went out. He didn't desert. It was just he wanted to take care of some business. So he went out there and found this person, Rip, and put a bullet through his heart, basically. And that was, you know, affairs like that usually weren't interfered with by the bluecoats or the authorities. There was no real, you know, going up for murder or anything like that. That was basically what they do on the res or what they do within their own community is not up to us. So that wasn't the big deal. What was the big deal is when Al Sieber got back and found out that the kid had gone off on this rampage or party or whatever, and then found out what he did. It wasn't so much what he did. It was more to Al Sieber's that you left your post and you shouldn't have, and this type of thing, and you shouldn't have been off gallivanting around. He got pretty pissed off, and so he sent out, I think he sent out Mickey Free, the other guy that I talked about earlier, his friend, to find him and bring him, tell him, come on in, you got to come on in and face the music and take your punishment or whatever you got to do, or reprimand or whatever it was. Didn't look like it was going to be that big a deal. You know, a slap of the wrist type situation. So when he came back, they all came back together, and it was almost like one of those foreboding days. They all came back together. I think there was probably about 6 or 8 of them. Probably more like 6. They came back to the compound, and they were in trouble, and Sieber was in the tent, and he immediately ordered that they all put their guns on this table, which they did. They started pulling out their guns and putting them on this table, except there was rebelliousness amongst the crew, and there was this interpreter at the time. I will get back to the photos here, but I got to set this up so you'll know what the photos are about. There was an interpreter at this time named Diaz, I believe he was, his name, and there were a lot of interpreters, just like Mickey Free was an interpreter as well. But a lot of times these interpreters wouldn't interpret the right way. If they had some kind of agenda on their own, or they didn't like a guy, when the guy talked, they would make him say things, they would interpret things to make him look bad. Okay. And this was kind of like one of those incidents where that happened. This interpreter, Diaz, I believe it was basically sending signals to the Apache kid and the other Apaches. He didn't like him. He didn't like him. He was against them. He didn't have any love for them at all. And he was sending them little signals, hand signals and stuff, and saying certain things that indicated that they were going to go to this island prison called Alcatraz, and that they were going to really be they're in big trouble. Well, when the scouts started looking at this guy and seeing him say that and sending these signals, they panicked. They went, "No, that ain't going to happen to us," and or they just got pissed off. I don't think they really panicked. They just got pissed off, and so one guy, and it is not known who really. I think it could have been a guy named Curly, a scout, or either that or Curly saw the guy. That probably was it that did it. He pulled out a gun and just started firing at Al Seaburn as he came out of his tent. And it erupted into people grabbing for guns, and Al Seaburn trying to wipe the guns off the table, and he went back in and got his gun, his Winchester, and came out. And bullets were flying all around. It's a wonder he didn't get killed right there. But what did happen is, I think it was a 44-70 high caliber gun, almost like like a buffalo gun or something. High caliber, hit his ankle. And that was it. Hit his left ankle and basically smashed it to bits, and wasn't a good thing for somebody that was a tracker and had already had problems with his other leg. And so he went down in a pool of blood. I mean, he lived. Al Seaburn lived. So see, this is what led up, long story short, this is what led up to the kid being railroaded and prosecuted and all kinds of stuff for something he did. The kid never shot Al Seaburn. In fact, the kid had turned his gun in already. So it wasn't the kid's fault at all. But he was there, and Al Seaburn basically held him responsible for the scouts. So according to Al Seaburn, it was his fault. Let me show you this picture now. I'll go back to the photos as I talk and intersperse them. And let me show you this picture of Al Seaburn after that he got shot. This is a picture of Al Seaburn after he got shot, and you could see I had to take it out of a book. I actually had to photograph this. This is a rare photo out of one of my historical references. You could see here his foot is all taped up. Doesn't look at all well like he did before, super fit. He'd probably been laying around for a while when this picture was taken. Gained weight. And here he is with crutches. So what happened after this incident was Al Seaburn got super pissed off and wanted to bring a bunch of these scouts to court, to federal court, I guess it was, because it was on the reservation, and he wanted them prosecuted. And he immediately turned on the kid. See, so there's this love-hate relationship again happening here. One minute you're loved, the next minute you're hated. Boy, I can identify with that big time. But anyway, he started hating the whole deal. He was bitter. Why was he bitter? Because he was messed up. His leg was messed up. His other leg, he had got a wound in the Civil War and recovered from that. And this leg, he was a supreme tracker. And after that, I mean, you do not want to see what a caliber bullet of that large will do to a leg. They had to, his leg was actually shorter after that. So wonder the doctor wanted to amputate his leg, but he said, "No, I ain't having any of that. I'm not going to have any of that." And he was just miserable after that, constantly in pain, probably drinking, taking laudanum, whatever. And so he pressed charges, him and Diaz and some of the other nut jobs in there that kind of had a hate for the Apache, pressed charges against the kid, and I think probably 3 or 4 of the other scouts. And they ended up having to go to trial. And I've read excerpts from the trial. I won't go into that now. But basically what happened here is that Al Sieber, let me go back here and I'll come back to the pictures in a minute. Al Sieber took him to court and basically didn't tell the truth in the court, didn't testify in kids' behalf, didn't do anything, didn't stick up for them, basically just lied in court. And so what happened was they all got convicted. They all got convicted, all of them, and they were sentenced. Now get this, I think they were convicted on mutiny and not murder, but mutiny and desertion or something like that. Well, back then that was a hanging offense. It was a hanging offense. And so that's what they got convicted on, and they were sentenced. Now, I don't know if they shot him or hung him, but I think it was firing squad back then. But they didn't get hung. They didn't get shot. Why? Because after the sentencing, General Miles, who I showed you that picture of before, go figure this one out. Yeah, he figured maybe there was some lying going on and some malfeasance in the whole trial thing, and maybe he didn't want blowback from that later on. I don't know what the deal was, but he intervened and basically he had the power to reduce the sentence, and so did I think the governor of the state. Anyway, there was a collusion and they got it reduced to life imprisonment, and then it got further reduced after that to something like 10 years or something like that. And then so the kid and these guys got shipped off to Alcatraz. Let me see if I can find a picture of that in here so you'll know what Alcatraz looked like back in the late 1800s. Here it is. Voila, a picture of Alcatraz. Alcatraz is an island in the bay out by San Francisco, and yeah, it's been around a long time. You probably heard of it. Most people have. Still a prison. I think it's shut down now, actually. I think it's a museum now. There was even they sent a lot of Apaches and a lot of Indians to Alcatraz. And there was even later on in the 60s or something, there was an occupation of Alcatraz by the American Indian movement in protest of what was done there. None of these places were nice. Okay, so when Kid got to Alcatraz, he was in the routine, you know. They cut his hair and everything. He didn't care. He cut his hair anyway sometimes. But he was toughing it out in the prison. And then, I don't know, I think the governor, somebody got wind of the malfeasance and that the thing wasn't exactly right. I don't know why in the world they did this, but they pardoned the Apache kid. So the Apache kid got out, and he was exposed to all kinds of things around that area. I put that in my book too. A little bit of fact and fiction in my book. I kind of spice it up. But he was finally out and made his way back to Arizona and wanted to just be with his wife and his family, and wasn't real concerned about being a tracker anymore or any of that stuff. He just wanted to be alone or be away from it all. That's when he turned completely lone wolf. And can you blame him? Can you blame him? So here's the kicker. The really bad part about this whole thing is that when he got back, the story continued on with the fact that Al Sieber was still pissed off, and he was livid, and he was beside himself, and he didn't know what to do. So he looked into it, and he found out that he could file they could be tried again. Double jeopardy didn't matter in this instance. He could be tried again, and this time he was going to try him on murder. All right, he was going to try him on murder charges or some other charges. Or assault or attempted murder, maybe that's what it was, against him, against Al Sieber, when the kid never did this in the first place. The kid was his friend. The kid didn't ever really want to shoot him. It was this other guy, like I said before. But he pursued this, and he brought it to court again, and the court was fixed. The fix was in, okay? So it was jurors and whoever was hearing this thing, and the witnesses were bribed, and this guy Curly didn't really tell the true story about how the Apache kid wasn't the one that fired, and I mean, it was just a mess. It was an out and out setup and lie, and the fix was in, just kind of like the Leonard Peltier incident of modern day times. Not modern day, but back in the 70s when they framed him, the FBI. He's still in jail. But anyway, they framed him and they got convicted again, okay? And so these same group of people, I think there was maybe 5 or 6 altogether, got sentenced again, and this time it wasn't, it was like, okay, they got sentenced to 7 years in Yuma prison. Well, I've been to Yuma prison. I'm an Arizona boy. I tracked all over that country and did a lot of traveling and seeing what I could see, and one of the things I wanted to see was Yuma prison because of the stories about it. When I got there, I just couldn't believe it. So let me show you some pictures of Yuma prison right now. Yeah, okay, so this is Yuma prison, the infamous Yuma prison. It is in Yuma, Arizona, right on the border. You can go there. It's a national park. You can go in and check it out if you're in that area. But this was a real hellhole. Look at the cells there. The bars on the door. These were like caves. These were snake infested, scorpion infested, rat infested, disease infested. If you got a sentence of 7 years, you were not expected to live. You were not expected to be able to live that long, 7 years in this hovel. Can you imagine in hundreds of degrees of heat and putting somebody that was a free Apache roaming around wild, sticking them in a place like this? Sheer torture. Torture unto death, basically, is what it amounted to. So this is where the Apache kid and the other scouts were going to be sent to. No pardon or anything this time. This is where they were going, all right? So as we progress on here, the sentence was in, the fix was in, they were on their way to Yuma, they'd been convicted. So they decided that they were going to ship them off by train, but in order to get to the train, they had to take a stagecoach from, I think it was Globe, to Tucson or wherever the train came in. Casa Grande, I believe it was. And so they loaded all these guys, as many as they could, on a stagecoach, and there were people that were in charge of this. So there were three basic people in charge. A guy named Hunkadori Holmes, Reynolds, the marshal of that town, who was pretty much of a badass. He'd been through, I think he was a Texas boy and had been on the Goodnight Trail and herded cattle and been a lawman, and kind of like a Wyatt Earp type character. So he was pretty tough, and he was in charge of getting the crew to Yuma Prison, getting the prisoners to Yuma Prison. And there was another guy named Middleton, and one other guy that slips my mind right now were in charge of getting them there. And they could only get so many people in the coach, and then I think the others basically had to march behind in chains. And they were guarded in the rear by this guy named Hunkadori Holmes. So let me show you some pictures of these guys right now so you can get a kind of a mental imagery of what's going on here. Yeah, so this is the Marshal Glenn Reynolds. He was the guy that was put in charge. And Seaver actually asked him at the time, why don't I send I'll get it right here. Why don't I send an attachment of scouts with you, like maybe 6, 7 guys, to make sure you get there safely? And Reynolds declined. Said, no, I got this handled. Don't worry about it. I got it under control. And so off they went. And he was on the stage, fully armed and everything. And then behind the guys that were walking behind the stage, there was a follow-up guard with them, Hunkadori Holmes. This is Hunkadori Holmes. And he was quite a character, really. I don't know what to make of this guy, but he said poetry all the time with his own name in it. He made up the poetry, Hunkadori Holmes, this and that. And just kind of an offbeat, wonder what he was all about type character to me. Hard to define. Definitely was armed, though, and was following up. And so here's what happened, basically. You had Reynolds and this guy guarding, or let's say driving the stage and guarding. And there was a guy named Middleton, too, that was there. There was one other person, I can't remember who. But, okay, so they came up to this grade in Arizona. They were on their way, and I think it was raining, and Kelvin grade or something like that, I believe it was. Back then it was really hard by stagecoach. You don't realize how hard it was to just travel by stagecoach. Not the modern conveniences of today. So anyway, this stagecoach is going up this grade and it can't make it. Keeps sliding back down. So they unload some of the prisoners and say, get out and push this thing up the hill. And so, as they did get out and push it up the hill, and it started up the hill. And I guess they were talking amongst themselves. They really had a plan. If this was ever to happen, maybe they thought about, they'll never get up that grade or whatever. And so as they pushed the stagecoach up the grade and kind of over the other side, the stagecoach went over the other side. These guys that were walking behind immediately turned on Hunkadori Holmes, who had a shotgun or Winchester or something. And they grappled with him, and I think Middleton was in there too. There was a grappling going on, baby. And what happened was Hunkadori Holmes, supposedly, by all accounts, just died right there, and not of a shot or not by an Apache, but of a heart attack. So, wow. Must have been pretty frightening experience. And The rest of the guys got overtaken. The marshal got overtaken, Reynolds and Middleton, and they were scuffling, and the guys went in, and the Apache kid wasn't part of any of this again. He was inside the stagecoach, handcuffed. And so they got the key, and they went inside the other prisoners and uncuffed the Apache kid, and he got out and grabbed a gun and was free, and they were all free at that point. And this Middleton guy made an attempt to do something, and he got shot through the mouth and out the back of his neck. Didn't hit his teeth or any, but somehow it got out the back of his neck without killing him. He was laying there in a pool of blood, and this one Indian got up and was going to take a rock and just smash his skull. And the kid went, "Don't do that." Stopped him again. See, this is the character of the kid. I want you to realize what's going on here. The kid had some morals, at least a few, or maybe even a spirituality. The tale is that, or the story is that this Middleton guy gave him a cigarette earlier on, or kind of befriended him on the trip before they got to this point, so he figured he owed him one. That's the kind of guy the Apache kid was. Anyway, they got away scot-free. Just left him there, stripped him down, took all their clothes and guns and all that stuff, and just made it out into the territory. Some of them headed to Mexico. Some went back to wherever their family was. But they were all wanted outlaws at that point, because Sieber then really flipped out. And wow, you know, everybody knew this Sheriff Reynolds, and Tom Horn, the famous tracker, is involved in this as well, because he was one of Reynolds' friends, and Mickey Free became involved at this time again, who I talked about earlier, because he was assigned to go out and look for the Apache kid and the outlaws, and so basically you had this big manhunt out there. And the Apache kid's roaming around, and these guys are roaming around. And they had to do different things to survive. But I'll tell you what, right now, every crime and every, just like they did with Geronimo, every crime in Arizona while these guys were out on the run, and especially the Apache kid, was assigned to them. They immediately were blamed for it. Oh, you know, if there was some killing down in Tucson, or one up in Prescott, or wherever there was a killing, or wherever was an Indian attack, or anything, it was all the Apache kid's fault, because they wanted him, and there was a bounty on his head, and there was all kinds of people looking for him. That's when he really became the chameleon. That's when he became the shapeshifter. That's when he became the lone wolf, the guy I love and admire for outsmarting the government, all right? The government goons, all right? The blue coats. He had just the super amount of skills, stealth. He was the supreme tracker. And actually, he teamed up with a guy later on called Masai, who was also in that same just superb, excellente person that could be stealth and sneak around. In fact, Masai, he was on his way to the Florida prisons with Geronimo, which I showed in an earlier video. And on the way there, he slipped off the train somewhere in St. Louis or something. They don't know how he did it. He got out a window or something. Here he was in St. Louis, and he made his way back in the dark every night. He hid during the day and made his way back in the dark along the railroad. He just followed the railroad tracks, stopped in towns and stuff, made his way all the way back to Arizona on foot. And so that was amazing in itself. But the reason I bring that up is because he teamed up with the Apache kid later on. Those two got together and kind of helped one another out. Because, let's face it, they were the last free Apache warriors like Geronimo and Victorio. And you see, this was all after that. This was all after these incidents that happened were after that. So they were the free roaming, the last of the breed, the holdouts, the ones that just kept going regardless. That's why I love these people. That's why I love these warriors. Because they stood up when they had to stand up for their freedom, and not only that, their families and everything else, which incidentally were also harassed during this time, and accosted and sent away and done all kinds of things. The blue coats, the white eyes, did all kinds of things to their families, and did everything they could to harass and sometimes even torture or whatever. So this story goes on, all right, and so the Mickey Free and Tom Horn. Let me show you a picture of Tom Horn here real quick. Yeah, this is, well, no, that's not, I think this is Hunkadori, no, not Hunkadori Holmes, Reynolds. I think that's who this is, if I'm not mistaken. I was looking for Tom Horn. They both look alike. They will look really, really a lot alike. Even Siebert. Let me see if I can find Tom Horn here. Yeah, this is Tom Horn here. Now this is, I was looking for another one actually, but this one will do. This is when he got, finally, Tom Horn ended up being in prison himself. But he was a tracker, and he was very knowledgeable, this guy. There's a movie about Tom Horn with Steve McQueen. It's a good movie. You should check it out. It's pretty true to fact. But anyway, Tom Horn was kind of an assassin at one point. I mean, he was kind of, okay, he was into the law and tracking, and I think he was a marshal for a while, and did all this good stuff. But like everybody back then, even Wyatt Earp, the lawmen knew both sides of the law, and they broke the law, and sometimes they were outlaws, and sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were lawmen, just like Wyatt Earp, all of them, on one side of the law and then the other. Well, you know, if you had a fast gun, you could sometimes get a good job as a marshal in Dodge City or whatever, because of that very fact. Even Doc Holliday had a fast gun and was used in the battle at Tombstone, the gunfight at the OK Corral. But I digress. This is Tom Horn, who later on got convicted of a murder because he was a range detective, or he worked for the big cattle barons. He worked, and basically he was the kind of guys you see in the movie that go out there and say, okay, move on, get off the land, or you're a squatter, or we don't want you here, or this is where our cattle graze, or whatever. He was for the stockmen, and kind of a cop, but then on the other hand, he did shady things, like scare people off by shooting them, or shooting a member of their family, or whatever. I don't know. I really will have to get into this story, and this is another video I could do of a colorful character. He even braided when he was in jail and he knew he was going to be hung, he braided his own rope that he got hung with. He just sat there and said, I don't have anything to do. So he wanted to make sure that when they hung him, it didn't snap, because that was the worst thing that could happen. If you're going to go, you might as well go quick. Yeah, so that's Tom Horn. Let's see, where do I go? Yeah, so I thought I'd try to wrap this video up because it's really, really getting long here, over an hour. I'm sure you're liking it, though, I hope. If you do, you know, this is crowdfunded. And I depend on your donations to keep this thing going, so I'll get to that later. Well, I like this painting here to kind of finish off the story. Kind of reminds me, it could be very well the Apache kid, out getting a drink in a stream, eluding everybody, being a supreme stealth guerrilla warrior, wanderer. Let me tell you the good ending about it. You know, his name actually meant, his Apache name actually meant tall, good-looking, dark stranger, or dark man, or tall, good-looking man who comes to a mysterious end. That was what his name meant. As Kebe ne Neto. As Kebe ne Neto. Neto. Probably. He did come to a mysterious end, although he didn't come to an end, because by all accounts, he evaded everybody. There were many, many people that went out after this guy. Mickey Free supposedly went out after him, his old friend, tracker friend. Tom Horn went after him. Everybody went after this guy, and they all claimed that they found him, but they never really brought back any of it. Oh, we got him, he's dead, because they were trying to get the $5,000 reward. Problem is, nobody ever got it, because they couldn't prove that it was them. They might find an object that he owned or something like that and bring it back and say, yeah, his body was decomposed or whatever. In fact, that was the famous story by Mickey Free. Oh, I found him, and you know, here's some stuff that I found, and yeah, it was him, and well, basically, it wasn't him. Now, you know, as truth comes to light, as you dig further into history and you find out more facts, they never caught the Apache kid. They only claimed to, all these different people. And of course, how could you, all the different people, kill the guy 3 or 4 or 5 times, you know? So anyway, they figured that Mickey Free, because he was trained with him as an Apache, actually staged the whole thing to throw him off the trail. I'll go out and look for him, and then he got with him, and he said, here, give me some objects, and I'll say you're dead. And then he went back, and he goes, I could get the 5,000 too. And so the Apache kid would have been down with that, no problem, okay. But whatever, it is said that he actually eluded everybody, went through all kinds of things, made all kinds of raids with Maasai, traveled the land, went all over the Southwest, just appeared everywhere, milled amongst the white man, talked to him, popped up here, popped up there. He was such a chameleon. He just evaded them all. What a master. To me, he was a master. He proved himself as the supreme tracker, warrior, and scout. But after that, he was like, I don't want to be around people. I'm a man on my own. I'm a lone wolf. And that's exactly what he did. And even Maasai traveled with him for a while. But they parted company as well. It ended up where he ended up in some way far away place down in Mexico. Could have even been further down. And living on, you know, in a beautiful countryside with, I can't remember the name, of Tejano Indians or something like that of that area. And so to me it had a happy ending because I'd rather not know, actually. I'd rather not know. But by all the research that I have done, and I tell you, I've done a lot of research on this guy, and I just gained a lot of respect. I gained a lot of respect for his abilities. Let's put it that way, seeing as I did a lot of tracking as a kid myself in Arizona. So that's it. That's the story of the Apache kid. I kind of like, there's so much more I could tell you, but I'm way over time now. Even though I didn't cover as many details and that type of thing as I could. At least you got a good taste of what the Apache kid was all about in the area. And if you couple that with my last video on the Apache people, you'll really get a good flavor of what's going on here and a good feel for the Southwest and a good feel for the stories of the Southwest and the true West. And that's what I do. I just tell stories, and I've always done that, and now I'm just starting to add photos more and stay on this track. So if you like this kind of thing, historical stories and surrounding the indigenous people and even the Old West in general, this is crowdfunded. In other words, you're it, baby. So I depend on that to keep this channel going. So anything that you would like to donate, you can do it here at spiritofcrazyhorse.com, and there's a donate button there when you go there. Or Roger Thunderhands at Gmail, you can contact me. Got 4 books actually, working on another one. Listen to the Wind, Speak from the Heart, spiritual sayings, like sitting around a campfire. And Emergence, which is an excellent, if I do say so myself, I'm proud of it, let's put it that way. People said this should be made into a movie. It's deep. It has a real effect on them, and it's a romance. It's based on a romance. 2 people, 2 native young people that are wisdom keepers, go through all kinds of things and changes and all kinds of shamanic teachings and stuff in this book. So yeah, appreciate you liking the video and giving it a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel if this is your niche. Something in here resonates with you. So I guess I'll leave it there today. I'll say Wopila. No, I made a few mistakes in here today. I'm doing this all off of the top of my head, man. I don't look in books. I refer to them, but I don't have like a teleprompter here, and I'm not reading, this is all from up here. So hope you like it. Wopila. Wash day, it is good. Aho.